Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly into the candlelit corridors of the Byzantine Empire, not to witness a grand battle or a scandalous court affair, but to sit cross-legged beside a government worker in a robe who is, quite literally, filing paperwork without a single shred of paper. You're not in a palace. You're not even near anything that smells remotely like perfume or power. You're in a dusty corner of a low stone building, somewhere in Constantinople. It's early morning. The sun hasn't shown up yet. The floor is cold, the air smells like wax and wet wool, and the man beside you just sneezed on his own inkpot. Welcome to the real machinery of empire, the Byzantine bureaucracy. You probably won't survive this, at least not without nodding off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. It's always fun to see where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. The man in front of you is wearing something between a bathrobe and a priest's tunic, technically called a dalmatica, and he is muttering a short prayer before beginning work. This isn't out of reverence for the task, necessarily. It's more that the ink is expensive, and if he messes up, he'll need to scrape it off a stretched bit of goat skin with a knife. That's right. No paper. No printer. Not even a wastebasket. In 9th century Byzantium, most official documents are written on parchment animal skin that has been soaked, scraped, stretched, dried, and often reused. It creaks faintly when unrolled, like an old saddle. The room is quiet except for the occasional scribble, the sigh of a bored junior clerk, and the distant clatter of sandals. There's no central heating. You wrap your cloak tighter. Outside, the city hasn't quite stirred, but inside these walls, the gears of government are already grinding. The table is low and uneven. No one is particularly comfortable. There's no coffee, just a chipped clay jug of watered wine, and maybe a half-stale roll if you're lucky. A clay lamp burns low and wobbly, threatening to go out every few minutes, which is thrilling if you enjoy watching men panic over documents about tax exemptions in Cappadocia. You lean over and watch as the scribe dips his feather quill plucked from a goose who probably didn't sign up for this into a shallow dish of dark brown ink. The ink, you'll notice, smells a bit like vinegar and wet bark. That's because it's made from oak galls, those weird knobby things that grow on trees when wasps lay their eggs in the leaves. Nature's little revenge becomes the empire's signature ink. The clerk is writing out a simple land transfer. Or at least, it should be simple. It turns out the same three men are claiming to own a vineyard in Bithynia, and one of them is dead, but nobody told the tax office, so technically he still owes a goat. And this is where things get fun. Byzantine bureaucrats loved rules. They loved forms. They loved seals, signatures, and long-winded titles. But what they didn't have was a filing cabinet. Most of the time, a completed scroll would be rolled up, tied with a thin linen ribbon, and stuffed into a wooden box or just stacked with dozens of others in what was generously called a record room. Spoiler, it was a closet. Still, for all the chaos, there's a strange grace to this rhythm. A clerk finishes a scroll, dusts it with fine sand to blot the ink, and passes it to another, who tags it with a bit of wax and a clay stamp. Every few hours, a runner, usually a teenage apprentice with questionable hygiene, delivers documents across town. Some never return. Some are eaten by dogs. Some, miraculously, end up on an imperial desk. You catch a glimpse of a senior official wandering past. He doesn't glance your way, but his robe has a small golden clasp in the shape of a stylized eagle, proof he is important enough to not get screamed at if he drops a document in the mud. Historians still argue whether this level of bureaucracy was functional genius or a thousand-year-long act of self-sabotage. On one hand, the Byzantines kept records of astonishing detail: marriages, dowries, military promotions, even the cost of candle wax in rural churches. On the other hand, sometimes two tax offices would accidentally assign the same goat to three different provinces. And yet, it worked. Mostly. You're watching a civilization that's figured out how to run a continent-spanning empire with animal skins, bone-handled knives, and an unwavering belief that if you wrote something down with the right ink, it became true. At one point, a younger scribe sits down beside you and offers a sleepy smile. He shows you his practice board, just a slab of wax in a wooden frame where he's been doodling Greek letters with a stylus. It's like a medieval etch-a-sketch, and yes, he drew something rude in the corner. Even in Byzantium, teenagers are teenagers. As the morning creeps forward, the scent of melting tallow and slightly sour parchment fills the air. The scribes settle into their rhythm, scratching, blotting, passing scrolls back and forth like paper sushi. A cat slinks by, probably official pest control, and curls up next to a basket of sealed edicts. You blink slowly, your eyes growing heavier. The empire hums quietly beneath your feet, and all around you, history is being written one cramped, curly letter at a time. You exhale, the way a bureaucrat does when they've filed something before lunch. You follow the cat's twitching tail out of the record room, trailing behind the slow shuffle of the scribe you've shadowed all morning. He's got a scroll tucked under one arm, a second one awkwardly wedged into his belt, and a half-eaten fig in the other hand. It's delivery time, because even in the height of Byzantine bureaucracy, nothing says official like personally schlepping a tax decree across the city on foot. The streets of Constantinople are already awake, and so are its smells. You're hit with a sharp bouquet of donkey sweat, fish brine, incense, and yesterday's cabbage stew. The city is layered geographically, politically, and aromatically. You pass narrow alleys cluttered with bakers shouting prices, priests muttering scripture, and chickens committing petty crimes. Your scribe pauses at a stone archway, adjusts his robe, and ducks into one of the empire's many bureaucratic sub-offices, this one tucked behind a spice merchant who seems more interested in bribing tax collectors with cinnamon than selling it. Inside, the air is cooler, quieter, dustier. Scrolls line the walls like snakes curled up for winter. A junior clerk glances up, sees your guy, and groans. They exchange pleasantries the way tired co-workers do, meaning, not at all. The scroll is handed over. A wax seal is poked, prodded, checked against a list. Then, for good measure, both men write the same thing on two separate slivers of parchment and then file them in boxes labeled with symbols only a trained wizard could decipher. This is how Byzantium avoided paperwork duplication. Mostly. Historians still argue whether these symbol index systems were ingenious or just creatively insane. A box marked with a dolphin might hold marriage contracts, or tax debts, or possibly military orders from 2 emperors ago. If you're lucky, someone's cousin remembers how it works. You sit down on a bench beside the entryway, watching as a woman in a crisp indigo robe walks in, unrolls a scroll, and begins what can only be described as a performance. Her voice is calm, but she's laying down layers of procedural Latin, punctuated by flourishes in Greek, all while waving a little wooden pointer like she's conducting a symphony. She's not a noblewoman. She's a notary. One of many legal specialists who memorize entire pages of imperial code, interpret land deeds like ancient spells, and occasionally settle debates over whose goat is standing in whose vineyard. One fun tidbit: notaries in Byzantium often trained from childhood, beginning as scribes, then apprenticing to older legal masters, many of whom ran informal schools out of their homes. Some even hosted dinner salons, where the wine flowed as freely as the footnotes. Think book club, but instead of reading the Iliad, you're arguing whether Emperor Justinian's tax reforms apply to flooded olive groves. Sexy stuff. The office door slams. A breathless boy runs in, eyes wild, scroll flapping like a banner. He shouts something about urgent edits to a land deed involving a missing hill. Two officials sigh in unison, grab their knives, and start scraping the surface of a nearly finished document. Ink flakes fall like tiny snowflakes. The hill, apparently, was misdrawn and technically belongs to a monastery now. Classic. Remember, parchment isn't disposable. Mistakes mean real work. No Ctrl+Z here, just careful scraping, releveling the surface with pumice, and praying the goat it came from doesn't haunt your dreams. Out in the hallway, a wall niche holds what looks like a set of rolled up carpets. They're not. These are giant scrolls, some over 5 feet long, detailing official census counts. They are, in fact, Byzantine spreadsheets. Beautiful, inefficient, and about as fun to interpret as a punch in the forehead. One entry includes a note: add 3 souls, previously unbaptized but now accounted for. A bureaucratic resurrection, if you will. Historians are still trying to determine how accurate these censuses were. Some claim the Byzantines mastered the art of demographic record-keeping. Others suggest whole towns were left out because the tax collector got seasick and turned back early. The truth, as always, likely lies in a gray area scribbled in a margin, 3 lines down from plague adjustment. You return your attention to the notary, who is now reviewing a document under something called a phylactery. No, not the wizard kind. This one is a tiny metal capsule containing sacred words, worn as spiritual protection. Many bureaucrats kept them nearby, believing that even paperwork needed divine insurance. Honestly, fair. She finishes her review with a gentle nod. A young assistant rushes forward with a seal case. Inside are dozens of small dies carved with names, symbols, and the occasional weird fish. The official seal is pressed into warm wax, then tied with a ribbon to the scroll. It smells faintly of beeswax and legitimacy. At one point, a clerk trips over a basket of seal cords, swears under his breath, and knocks over a jar of blackberries. The resulting chaos ruins half a tax decree and part of someone's lunch. A supervisor enters, sees the mess, mutters again, and begins dictating a report that blames the floor. It's always the floor. These are the true moments of Byzantine government, the ones you won't find in the textbooks. The accidental ink blots. The arguments over whose turn it is to sharpen the quills. The sudden panic when someone realizes the seal for the Archon of Samos is missing, only to discover it fell behind a statue of Saint Helena and has been wedged in her sandal for 3 weeks. Eventually, your scribe finishes his business. He nods toward the door. You follow him out into the street again, squinting into the midday sun. The city's noise wraps around you once more: bells, hammers, cries of hawkers selling warm flatbread and questionable cheese. You've just watched an entire imperial transaction unfold, all without a single piece of disposable paper. Impressive. And mildly exhausting. You yawn, the way one does after being deeply impressed by very slow progress. You're walking now, following your scribe-turned-tour guide through a maze of corridors behind the city's administrative center. his sandals slap against worn stone in an unhurried rhythm. You pass a cloistered courtyard with vines twisting up cracked columns, a fountain gently burbling in the middle. It might seem serene until you notice the four clerks huddled on a bench, deep in an argument over a missing land charter from 3 reigns ago. The paperwork isn't lost. It's never lost. It's just elsewhere. Maybe misfiled under a different emperor's name. Maybe copied onto the back of a hymn by a monk who thought he was being efficient. Maybe chewed up by one of the stray cats that roam the halls with the same authority as any minor noble. In this paperless world, everything is precious, especially vellum. Each sheet could have come from a goat that dined exclusively on mountain thyme and holy starlight, judging by how delicately it's handled. So copies are made sparingly. When a new decree is issued, it might be transcribed a handful of times, each version carried to a different corner of the empire, entrusted to low-ranking bureaucrats with high anxiety. The funny part, Byzantium didn't even call it paperwork. The term didn't exist. What they had was grammata, a delightful catch-all for official writings, orders, and the occasional love note disguised as a trade permit. One such document was uncovered in an old monastery, an imperial tax exemption with a suspiciously poetic postscript to a flax merchant in Thebes. Historians still argue whether it was genuine policy or just a very bureaucratic flirt. Inside a small vaulted room, your guide stops to introduce you to one of the copyists. He's hunched over a wooden desk, surrounded by sharpened reeds and open inkpots. No natural light, just the flicker of a single oil lamp and the smell of burnt parchment from a failed draft. You half expect him to hiss at your presence like a territorial toad. Instead, he grunts and waves you over, revealing a half-finished scroll laid flat on the desk. The lettering is impossibly neat. No blotches. No smudges. Just the measured elegance of someone who has spent 40 years copying royal decrees and could probably scribe a death sentence in his sleep. This, it turns out, is a senior chartophylax, a kind of human flash drive who remembers where every important document lives. Ask him about a tax edict from 2 decades ago, and he'll blink 3 times, chew his lip, and then mutter something like North Wing, cubbyhole behind the missing icon of Saint Demetrius. He's never wrong. He hands you a scroll. Not to keep, God's forbid, but to hold. It's lighter than you expect, and a little greasy. The outside is marked with red ink, a stylized double-headed eagle and the name of a rural judge. Inside, a list of property boundaries, measured not in feet or meters, but in paces of a fasting monk and distance between 2 sycamores. You try not to laugh. This is serious stuff, sort of. The scribe smiles dryly. We're still arguing about that sycamore, he says. In another corner, a junior clerk is boiling glue from old fish bones. It smells exactly like it sounds. This is for binding scrolls with thread, wax, and a whispered prayer that the whole thing doesn't unravel mid-delivery. You ask if they've ever tried simplifying the process. He looks at you like you suggested outlawing vowels. Despite the patchwork logic of this empire-wide system, it works kind of. Byzantium endured for over 1,000 years, and a big part of that longevity can be credited to its ability to record, track, and argue about just about anything. Land ownership, inheritance rights, grain distribution, the exact number of horses owed by a bishop in Trebizond, it's all in the records. Somewhere. Scholars still debate whether the Byzantine record-keeping system was fundamentally conservative or wildly adaptive. On the one hand, they clung to scrolls well into the era of bound books. On the other, they constantly retooled the bureaucracy to match changing power structures, even inventing new offices with elaborate names and zero defined duties. One real title, Protospatarios of the Chrysotriclinos. Roughly translated first sword guy of the fancy golden room. His job was unclear. But he definitely had a desk. You follow a narrow stairway down into the bowels of the building, cooler now, damper, and crowded with crates of tax grain records. Here, the walls are lined with cubbies like an apothecary's cabinet. Each one holds a scroll, many tied with cords dyed different colors to indicate urgency. A red cord active. A green one resolved. A yellow one pending review from someone who may or may not have died last winter. You notice one cubby stuffed with scrolls wrapped in linen. This is the archive of expired disputes, a graveyard of bureaucratic hopes and dreams. Some of them are over a century old. And yet, no one dares throw them out. Because you never know when some descendant might come banging on the door, demanding to prove that their grandfather really did own half a fig orchard and a camel with a limp. In this way, the Byzantine record system becomes more than paperwork. It becomes a memory, rigid, fragile, and weirdly sentimental. Each scroll is a little echo of someone else's mess, preserved forever in goat skin and ink. Eventually, you climb back up into the daylight, eyes squinting, lungs adjusting to air that doesn't smell like mildew and boiled glue. The scribe beside you stretches and mutters something about lunch. You nod. You're starting to get hungry too, though you'll probably skip anything involving fish bones for now. You follow your scribe-turned-tour guide through a maze of corridors behind the city's administrative center. His sandals slap against worn stone in an unhurried rhythm. You pass a cloistered courtyard with vines twisting up cracked columns, a fountain gently burbling in the middle. It might seem serene until you notice the four clerks huddled on a bench, deep in an argument over a missing land charter from 3 reigns ago. The paperwork isn't lost. It's never lost. It's just elsewhere. Maybe misfiled under a different emperor's name. Maybe copied onto the back of a hymn by a monk who thought he was being efficient. Maybe chewed up by one of the stray cats that roam the halls with the same authority as any minor noble. In this paperless world, everything is precious, especially vellum. Each sheet could have come from a goat that dined exclusively on mountain thyme and holy starlight, judging by how delicately it's handled. So copies are made sparingly. When a new decree is issued, it might be transcribed a handful of times, each version carried to a different corner of the empire, entrusted to low-ranking bureaucrats with high anxiety. The funny part, Byzantium didn't even call it paperwork. The term didn't exist. What they had was grammata, a delightful catch-all for official writings, orders, and the occasional love note disguised as a trade permit. One such document was uncovered in an old monastery, an imperial tax exemption with a suspiciously poetic postscript to a flax merchant in Thebes. Historians still argue whether it was genuine policy or just a very bureaucratic flirt. Inside a small vaulted room, your guide stops to introduce you to one of the copyists. He's hunched over a wooden desk, surrounded by sharpened reeds and open ink pots. No natural light, just the flicker of a single oil lamp and the smell of burnt parchment from a failed draft. You half expect him to hiss at your presence like a territorial toad. Instead, he grunts and waves you over, revealing a half-finished scroll laid flat on the desk. The lettering is impossibly neat. No blotches. No smudges. Just the measured elegance of someone who has spent 40 years copying royal decrees and could probably scribe a death sentence in his sleep. This, it turns out, is a senior chartophylax, a kind of human flash drive who remembers where every important document lives. Ask him about a tax edict from 2 decades ago, and he'll blink 3 times, chew his lip, and then mutter something like North Wing, cubbyhole behind the missing icon of Saint Demetrius. He's never wrong. He hands you a scroll. Not to keep God's forbid but to hold. It's lighter than you expect, and a little greasy. The outside is marked with red ink, a stylized double-headed eagle and the name of a rural judge. Inside a list of property boundaries, measured not in feet or meters, but in paces of a fasting monk and distance between two sycamores. You try not to laugh. This is serious stuff. Sort of, the scribe smiles. Dryly. We're still arguing about that sycamore, he says. In another corner, a junior clerk is boiling glue from old fish bones. It smells exactly like it sounds. This is for binding scrolls with thread, wax, and a whispered prayer that the whole thing doesn't unravel mid-delivery. You ask if they've ever tried simplifying the process. He looks at you like you suggested outlawing vowels. Despite the patchwork logic of this empire-wide system, it works kind of. Byzantium endured for over 1,000 years, and a big part of that longevity can be credited to its ability to record, track, and argue about just about anything. Land ownership, inheritance rights, grain distribution, the exact number of horses owed by a bishop in Trebizond, it's all in the records. Somewhere. Scholars still debate whether the Byzantine record-keeping system was fundamentally conservative or wildly adaptive. On the one hand, they clung to scrolls well into the era of bound books. On the other, they constantly retooled the bureaucracy to match changing power structures, even inventing new offices with elaborate names and zero-defined duties. One real title, Protospatarios of the Chrysotriclinos. Roughly translated first sword guy of the fancy golden room. His job was unclear. But he definitely had a desk. You follow a narrow stairway down into the bowels of the building, cooler now, damper, and crowded with crates of tax grain records. Here, the walls are lined with cubbies like an apothecary's cabinet. Each one holds a scroll, many tied with cords dyed different colors to indicate urgency. A red cord active. A green one resolved. A yellow one pending review from someone who may or may not have died last winter. You notice one cubby stuffed with scrolls wrapped in linen. This is the archive of expired disputes, a graveyard of bureaucratic hopes and dreams. Some of them are over a century old. And yet, no one dares throw them out. Because you never know when some descendant might come banging on the door, demanding to prove that their grandfather really did own half a fig orchard and a camel with a limp. In this way, the Byzantine record system becomes more than paperwork. It becomes a memory, rigid, fragile, and weirdly sentimental. Each scroll is a little echo of someone else's mess, preserved forever in goatskin and ink. Eventually, you climb back up into the daylight, eyes squinting, lungs adjusting to air that doesn't smell like mildew and boiled glue. The scribe beside you stretches and mutters something about lunch. You nod. You're starting to get hungry too, though you'll probably skip anything involving fish bones for now. You trail behind your guide as he moves through the open-air colonnade connecting one wing of the chancery to another. The sun is high now, pouring golden light over cracked mosaic floors. Somewhere nearby, a vendor yells about ripe apricots, and pigeons squabble for crumbs near a half-forgotten fresco. Your stomach rumbles, but you're pulled along before you can investigate. You've arrived at the heart of Byzantine legal filing, a courtyard filled with wooden lecterns, bundled scrolls, and an alarming number of hunched men wearing ink-stained robes. These are the notarioi, or notaries, who serve as the empire's most relentless interpreters of law, custom, and administrative will. They are simultaneously revered and feared. They write in fast, shorthand Greek that looks like an ant colony ran across the parchment, and they're often the only ones who can read it back. Your guide points to one such notary, currently leaning on his desk and arguing with a beetle that crawled onto his ink block. That's Kyriakos. He's been working on the same land dispute since before you were born. You glance at Kyriakos. He seems to register your existence, then returns to muttering something about disputed irrigation rights and stolen wheat shadows. You decide not to get involved. The complexity of Byzantine bureaucracy wasn't just a byproduct of laziness or over-education, it was a strategy. A confusing system is a controllable system. If no one fully understands it except the people inside it, then power remains right where it's supposed to be, with the scribes, clerks, and the carefully cultivated chaos of it all. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate obfuscation or merely the natural result of a civilization trying to survive 13 centuries without a filing cabinet. In the center of the courtyard is a marble table, once used for ceremonial coin counts. Now it holds a rotating pile of petitions, complaints, and notices, all meticulously sealed with wax. The seals themselves are little artworks, bearing family crests, religious symbols, or the imperial double eagle. Each one is pressed using a personalized matrix often worn on a chain around the neck like an ID badge that could also stop a small X. One document draws your eye. It's a marriage contract between a silk merchant's daughter and a local shipwright. The terms are long, oddly romantic, and legally binding. She brings with her 2 bolts of crimson brocade, a small silver censer, and a chicken that respects authority. He brings a boat and an uncertain smile. There's even a clause about what to do if one party joins a monastery unexpectedly, a surprisingly common event. A clerk named Minos invites you to sit beside him. His bench creaks. His bones do, too. He opens a folder made of flattened goat skin, revealing a tax dispute between 2 retired cavalry officers. Both claim the same orchard. One cites divine inheritance, the other, an ancestral whisper. The case has been going on for 7 years. Minos sighs. I hope they both live long enough to see it end, he says, not entirely convinced that either of them has noticed it's still active. You peek at Minos' tools, a reed pen worn to a nub, a clay palette for mixing pigment, a sharp knife for scraping mistakes from vellum. There's a spoonful of sand for blotting ink and a curious little bowl holding crushed rose petals. For the smell, he explains. And sometimes, for the magistrate's nerves. Bureaucratic life wasn't all stamps and scrolls. There was hierarchy. Ambition. Subtle sabotage. Junior clerks would sometimes rewrite senior memos just to make themselves seem smarter or insert suspiciously pointed footnotes that cast doubt on earlier rulings. Entire careers were made by catching errors in someone else's Latin phrasing. And don't even ask about bribes. While technically illegal, it was well known that a few coins, a good bottle of wine, or a freshly plucked fig tart could nudge a decision in your favor. The Byzantines even had a word for it, dorodokia, the art of gift-giving in precisely the right amounts to seem generous, not criminal. Scholars still debate whether this practice undermined the empire or simply kept it running. You watch a young clerk scurry past with a basket full of scrolls and a panicked expression. He's just been told he delivered a decree to the wrong bishopric, a 3-week round trip by donkey. He mutters something about becoming a monk and disappears behind a door marked with a faded icon of Saint Basil, patron saint of something. Probably lost causes. And yet, amid the chaos, there's a strange sense of order. Everyone knows their role. Documents move, slowly but surely. Petitions are read. Edicts are copied. Justice, or something like it, is administered. There's comfort in the rhythm, even if the melody is played slightly out of tune. Suddenly, a bell rings from the far end of the courtyard. Lunch. The scribes shuffle off in small groups, some stretching, others still arguing. You rise, following your guide through a narrow gate that leads into a garden shaded by fig trees. The smell of lentils and baking flatbread drifts through the air. Somewhere, a lute plays softly. You realize you're smiling. Because for all its absurdity, for the clunky titles, the vanishing scrolls, the monks who confuse psalms with permits, there's something undeniably human about the Byzantine filing system. It wasn't just paperwork. It was poetry. Bad, overlong, bureaucratic poetry, but poetry nonetheless. And as you sit under a tree with a plate of olives and cheese, you begin to suspect that the empire might not have survived on military strength or divine favor alone. No, it was probably held together by 1,000 tired clerks, a million careful strokes of ink, and an unwavering belief that everything should be written down. Twice. You follow your scribe-turned-tour guide through a maze of corridors behind the city's administrative center. His sandals slap against worn stone in an unhurried rhythm. You pass a cloistered courtyard with vines twisting up cracked columns, a fountain gently burbling in the middle. It might seem serene until you notice the 4 clerks huddled on a bench, deep in an argument over a missing land charter from 3 reigns ago. The paperwork isn't lost. It's never lost. It's just elsewhere. Maybe misfiled under a different emperor's name. Maybe copied onto the back of a hymn by a monk who thought he was being efficient. Maybe chewed up by one of the stray cats that roam the halls with the same authority as any minor noble. In this paperless world, everything is precious, especially vellum. Each sheet could have come from a goat that dined exclusively on mountain thyme and holy starlight, judging by how delicately it's handled. So copies are made sparingly. When a new decree is issued, it might be transcribed a handful of times, each version carried to a different corner of the empire, entrusted to low-ranking bureaucrats with high anxiety. The funny part, Byzantium didn't even call it paperwork. The term didn't exist. What they had was grammata, a delightful catch-all for official writings, orders, and the occasional love note disguised as a trade permit. One such document was uncovered in an old monastery, an imperial tax exemption with a suspiciously poetic postscript to a flax merchant in Thebes. Historians still argue whether it was genuine policy or just a very bureaucratic flirt. Inside a small vaulted room, your guide stops to introduce you to one of the copyists. He's hunched over a wooden desk, surrounded by sharpened reeds and open inkpots. No natural light, just the flicker of a single oil lamp and the smell of burnt parchment from a failed draft. You half expect him to hiss at your presence like a territorial toad. Instead, he grunts and waves you over, revealing a half-finished scroll laid flat on the desk. The lettering is impossibly neat. No blotches. No smudges. Just the measured elegance of someone who has spent 40 years copying royal decrees and could probably scribe a death sentence in his sleep. This, it turns out, is a senior chartophylax, a kind of human flash drive who remembers where every important document lives. Ask him about a tax edict from 2 decades ago, and he'll blink 3 times, chew his lip, and then mutter something like North Wing, cubbyhole behind the missing icon of Saint Demetrius. He's never wrong. He hands you a scroll. Not to keep, God's forbid, but to hold. It's lighter than you expect, and a little greasy. The outside is marked with red ink, a stylized double-headed eagle and the name of a rural judge. Inside, a list of property boundaries, measured not in feet or meters, but in paces of a fasting monk and distance between 2 sycamores. You try not to laugh. This is serious stuff. Sort of, the scribe smiles. Dryly. "We're still arguing about that sycamore," he says. In another corner, a junior clerk is boiling glue from old fish bones. It smells exactly like it sounds. This is for binding scrolls with thread, wax, and a whispered prayer that the whole thing doesn't unravel mid-delivery. You ask if they've ever tried simplifying the process. He looks at you like you suggested outlawing vowels. Despite the patchwork logic of this empire-wide system, it works kind of. Byzantium endured for over 1,000 years, and a big part of that longevity can be credited to its ability to record, track, and argue about just about anything. Land ownership, inheritance rights, grain distribution, the exact number of horses owed by a bishop in Trebizond, it's all in the records. Somewhere. Scholars still debate whether the Byzantine record-keeping system was fundamentally conservative or wildly adaptive. On the one hand, they clung to scrolls well into the era of bound books. On the other, they constantly retooled the bureaucracy to match changing power structures, even inventing new offices with elaborate names and zero-defined duties. One real title, Protospatarios of the Chrysotriclinos. Roughly translated first sword guy of the fancy golden room. His job was unclear. But he definitely had a desk. You follow a narrow stairway down into the bowels of the building, cooler now, damper, and crowded with crates of tax grain records. Here, the walls are lined with cubbies like an apothecary's cabinet. Each one holds a scroll, many tied with cords dyed different colors to indicate urgency. A red cord active. A green one resolved. A yellow one pending review from someone who may or may not have died last winter. You notice one cubby stuffed with scrolls wrapped in linen. This is the archive of expired disputes, a graveyard of bureaucratic hopes and dreams. Some of them are over a century old. And yet, no one dares throw them out. Because you never know when some descendant might come banging on the door, demanding to prove that their grandfather really did own half a fig orchard and a camel with a limp. In this way, the Byzantine record system becomes more than paperwork. It becomes a memory, rigid, fragile, and weirdly sentimental. Each scroll is a little echo of someone else's mess, preserved forever in goat skin and ink. Eventually, you climb back up into the daylight, eyes squinting, lungs adjusting to air that doesn't smell like mildew and boiled glue. The scribe beside you stretches and mutters something about lunch. You nod. You're starting to get hungry too, though you'll probably skip anything involving fish bones for now. Already drowning in scrolls and wooden tally boards. He hands you a reed pen, points to a parchment filled with numbers, and says, "Check for discrepancies." You nod solemnly. You have no idea what you're doing. You learn quickly, though. Byzantine tax forms weren't exactly intuitive. Instead of clear columns, they often looked like long rambling letters, full of flourishes, anecdotes, and passive-aggressive remarks about the farmer's handwriting. Some notes even include small, judgmental drawings. One tax collector favored an angry chicken to mark suspicious entries. Mainstream historians agree that the Byzantine fiscal system, for all its complexity, was shockingly effective for its time. The empire managed to survive for centuries on a foundation of tax registers and property evaluations. Farmers were categorized by how many yokes of oxen they owned, and urban merchants were taxed on their production unless they claimed monastic exemptions, in which case, paperwork ensued. Endless paperwork. Historians still argue whether the infamous Praktiken, the tax assessment report, was a tool for fairness or a weapon for imperial extortion. It could record everything: size of fields, condition of vineyards, age of donkeys, presence of windmills, and even marital status. One unlucky widow in Cappadocia received a double tax bill for owning too many chickens and no husband. Bureaucracy, you learn, has a sense of humor. A cruel one. There were regional variations, of course. The island provinces used seaweed as partial currency during shortages. Armenian territories sometimes paid in salt bricks. And one Thracian village, out of protest or confusion, tried to fulfill its entire tribute in pickled onions. The response was a strongly worded scroll and a replacement governor. Sometimes the records themselves became status symbols. Wealthy landowners would commission decorated ledgers with gold ink and margin illustrations to impress imperial auditors. One nobleman even included a short poem at the end of his grain inventory. You read it? It rhymed wheat with defeat. A stretch. But you also see the system's dark underbelly. Tax collectors could be brutal. Some used threats. Others, charm. One particularly infamous official, Nikitas the Smiler, was said to extract triple payments just by smiling ominously and folding his arms. There are still legal complaints against him stored in the archives, all ending with phrases like "and then he grinned, and I knew it was over." Still, for all its flaws, the fiscal machine worked. Coins flowed into the capital. Armies were paid. Roads were repaired. Public fountains gurgled with confidence. All because someone, somewhere, remembered to count the sheep. And then count them again. And then report that count in triplicate, tied with a green ribbon. The clerk next to you sighs and scratches his chin with his ink brush. Third entry from the bottom, he mutters. That vineyard didn't exist until last year. I think the owner forged the date. You lean over. The grapes are listed as miraculous, and the yield improbably high. A fraud, clearly, or a truly blessed vine. To confirm the fraud, the office would dispatch a demogeron, a local elder, and a low-ranking official called a mandator. Their job: march to the vineyard, inspect the soil, count the grapes, and quiz the neighbors. It was a slow process. One that often ended with a stern warning and, occasionally, shared wine. You discover a filing method here that defies belief. Rather than storing tax scrolls by date or region, this office sometimes files them by weather. One cabinet is marked flood year accounts, another drought plus locusts. It's bizarrely effective, if a little grim. There's even a room with nothing but tax exemptions for churches and monasteries. These aren't short. Each one contains the justification, a quote from scripture, and at least one endorsement from a saint, usually in the form of a copied vision or miracle. You read one claiming Saint Basil personally cursed a tax auditor who dared question a grain shipment. Whether it's true or not, the ledger has a coffee stain and ends mid-sentence. You assume the clerk took the warning seriously. You begin to sense the immense balancing act required to keep the system moving. Too much taxation rebellion. Too little bankruptcy. One Emperor Anastasius I once tried to simplify it all by abolishing a major tax. The people loved him. The treasury wept. The policy didn't last. The sun slants through the window now, golden and soft. The smell of ink mixes with sweat and old parchment. You reach for another scroll and find yourself, almost enjoying it. There's something oddly satisfying about seeing a society try to quantify itself. Field by field. Sheep by sheep. Even if some sheep, apparently, lied. You glance down and realize your fingers are smudged with ink. Your back aches, your eyes blur, but you've begun to understand the Byzantine miracle. It wasn't just religion or war that held the empire together. It was paper. Or goatskin. Or wax tablets. But you get the point. You wake with a slight crick in your neck. Not because you fell asleep at your desk, no, you were simply reclining contemplatively. That's your story and you're sticking to it. The air has shifted. There's a breeze from an open window, and you hear the muffled clatter of hooves beyond the courtyard. A new day in Constantinople has begun, and today, you're stepping into the world of messengers. Not just any messengers. We're talking about the imperial courier system, the Byzantine cursus publicus. An institution so critical, so intricately layered, that even the emperor's edicts moved no faster than the feet or hooves of these dusty-footed deliverers. You tie your sandals tighter. Things are about to get mobile. The palace dispatch office is its own little whirlwind. Scrolls are wrapped in oiled cloth, wax seals applied with brisk efficiency, and messages are sorted into color-coded pouches. Each is destined for a different theme, those semi-autonomous military administrative districts the Byzantines loved so much. You spot labels for Opsiction, Thrace, Zion, and even the far-off Armeniacan. A weary supervisor, eyes bleary, hands calloused, hands you a small satchel and says, "Ride fast. Or don't come back." You assume he's joking. You hope. Outside, you find your ride, a patient, unimpressed donkey named Lysippos. Horses are reserved for priority deliveries. You, dear traveler, are what's known as moderate urgency. Lysippos yawns. And so you set off, wobbling slightly as you get used to the donkey's rhythm. The city slips behind you, rooftops gleaming, domes catching the sun, the golden horn stretching into the haze, and the road opens wide. The empire unfolds ahead in dry heat and chirping cicadas. Relay stations called mutatio dot the road every 15 to 20 miles. These are your lifeline. Here, couriers change mounts, rest, eat, and, crucially, gossip. Because let's be honest, courier stations weren't just for logistics. They were Byzantine Twitter. News, rumors, slander, and conspiracy theories flew between couriers faster than the messages themselves. You hear one man whisper that Emperor Constantine VII writes poetry under a false name. Another claims the Empress secretly runs a spy ring from a bakery. You nod sagely, jotting it all down in the margins of your delivery note. Mainstream historians often praise the Byzantine courier network as a marvel of imperial administration. Despite lacking modern roads or mail trucks, these messengers kept the empire connected from Sicily to Syria. With enough urgency and the right permits sealed by the chrysobull, a golden imperial edict, a message could reach the eastern frontier in mere days. But historians still argue whether the system truly remained reliable through the empire's long decline. Some claim the network fractured in the 11th century. Others insist rogue governors began hijacking couriers to deliver personal love letters and shopping lists. One theory even suggests a high-ranking eunuch once sent an entire roast goose to Cappadocia by mistake. The goose never arrived. Of course, not all messages were safe. Couriers often carried false letters meant to mislead enemy spies or double agents carrying real letters sealed inside fake ones. Byzantine diplomacy, after all, was never simple. You remember the phrase, "Send silk to Persia, threats to Bulgaria, and honeyed words to Rome." And don't mix them up. The roads themselves are stories. Some are paved with centuries-old Roman stones. Others are dusty goat trails through pine groves and olive orchards. One path leads you under a crumbling aqueduct, another beside a monastery where the monks wave lazily as you pass. You feel a strange kinship with them, both sworn to duty, both probably overdue for a nap. You're handed a new scroll at a remote station. It's marked Anacteron, eyes only. You gulp. This one's headed to the Blacherny Palace, directly to the imperial desk. The wax seal bears the double-headed eagle, and you're not allowed to ask what it says. You ask anyway. The clerk smiles. No idea. But one time, a courier peeked inside one of those and ended up posted to the outer wall of Chersonesus in winter. You decide not to peek. You pass through market towns and sleepy villages. You stop once to help a man repair a broken wheel, and in exchange, he gives you a ripe fig and a story about a bishop who turned wine into better wine. You take notes. One evening, you're forced to sleep in a goat pen during a storm. It smells vivid. The goats snore louder than you do. You dream about scrolls that unravel endlessly, their text laughing as you chase it across fields of ink. By dawn, you're back on the road. You start to notice the signs of courier hierarchy. The fastest riders wear red sashes. Some have armored escorts. There are elite couriers who carry not messages but tiny relics, saints' bones, shreds of holy garments meant to bless distant outposts. One man claims he once delivered a single feather that had belonged to Saint Michael. You're not sure how he proved it? Even courier pouches tell stories. The worn leather, the wax markings, the faint scent of myrrh from ecclesiastical dispatches all speak of where a message has been and what it carries. You feel like a message yourself. Sleep deprived, slightly crushed, but full of important secrets. At last, you return to the capital. The donkey trudges through the gates, unimpressed by your spiritual growth. You dismount in the palace courtyard, hand over your final dispatch, and watch it vanish into the shimmering corridors of imperial administration. You've traveled hundreds of miles. You've seen the veins that keep the Byzantine body politic alive. And you've done it all without a single envelope. You sit down on a stone bench, stretch your aching legs, and bite into the last of the figs. Congratulations! You've survived the cursus publicus. You slump against a marble column, eyes half-lidded. Your legs ache from donkey miles, your shoulders bear the weight of scrolls and sunburn, and you smell vaguely like courier station stew. Still, rest is not for the imperial scribe. Not yet. Because tonight, you're heading into the shadowy, parchment-drenched world of the chartularios, the archivists, clerks, and bureaucratic ghouls who make up the Byzantine Empire's most impenetrable institution, the Imperial Record Office. You shuffle in, scroll bag still clutched against your chest. The room you enter isn't large, but it feels cavernous. Parchment lines the walls in horizontal rolls, tied with silk cords and labeled with an alphabet only mildly less confusing than linear B. The air is thick with dust, beeswax, and the unmistakable whiff of ancient ink. This is the Chartophalakian, literally, the keeper of the papers. Though in truth, it's more like a dungeon where papyrus goes to die and be reborn again as imperial doctrine. A man in a faded blue tunic motions you to follow. He doesn't speak. He simply shuffles through narrow aisles, past tables strewn with metal still uses, oil lamps, and stacks of decisions written in a language that looks suspiciously like someone spilled noodles on a page and called it Greek minuscule. He stops at a desk and gestures, "Sit." You sit. "Copy this," he says, dropping a faded document before you. You squint at it. It's a prostigma, a mid-ranking imperial order, issued sometime around the reign of Alexios I Komnenos. You think. The ink has faded to a moody gray-brown, like oversteeped tea. You're handed a quill, a knife for scraping mistakes, and a blank sheet of parchment that still smells faintly of goat. Deep breath. You begin. The room fades away as your hand moves, looping, scratching, lifting, dipping. It's hypnotic. Each letter you copy must be flawless, each abbreviation precise. You are not writing words. You are resurrecting them. Somewhere in the folds of this document is a land grant for a monastery, or a change in a water tax, or a revised list of banned circus performances. You may never know. But your job is to make it live again. Historians agree that the Byzantine bureaucracy was legendary for its paperwork. Imperial scribes created and preserved documents across generations: chrysobules, sigilia, prostigmata, heroi. Each had its own format, hierarchy, and terrifying margin rules. But historians still argue whether the majority of these documents were truly read by their recipients or if some simply became ritual scrolls, paraded and stamped as a form of symbolic obedience. As for you, you're deep into hour 2 of copying. The oil lamp flickers. The room grows warmer. The only sound is the soft scratch of quills and the occasional sigh of a man who just realized he misspelled strategos. Your neighbor leans over. You ever hear about the cursed scroll of Basil II? He whispers. You raise an eyebrow. Supposedly, some junior clerk added an extra 0 to a grain shipment quota. Whole village starved. Ever since, Basil's scrolls have to be copied backwards first, then forwards. For balance. You don't believe him. But also, you kind of do. There are stories everywhere in this place. A sealed compartment in the back allegedly contains a map of all hidden churches in Anatolia. Another cabinet holds diplomatic letters from Venice written on silk and perfumed with orange blossoms. One rumor claims a former Chartularios invented a secret script only he could read. When he died, his entire archive became useless. It now functions solely as an elaborate doorstop. You pause and stretch your hands. The scribe master approaches. He looks at your page, nods once, and then smears your last word with his thumb. Again, he says. You feel your soul leave your body. Parchment was expensive. So were trained scribes. Monasteries sometimes reused old scrolls, scraping off the ink to write something new, resulting in palimpsests. You saw one earlier, an 8th century military order hiding beneath a 10th century sermon about the dangers of laughter. If the sermon wins, you lose. Every now and then, the clerks take a break. They shuffle into a small room with an iron brazier and cups of sweetened wine. Someone plays a lyre badly. Someone else recites a dirty limerick about the Empress's second cousin and a runaway goose. Even bureaucrats need hobbies. One man brings out his prize, a miniature codex filled with drawings of ships and siege engines. My grandson thinks I'm a general, he says proudly. I told him I command the ink division. You sip your wine and stare into the brazier. The coals glow like embered wax seals, stamped and set by emperors long turned to dust. Eventually, you return to your desk. Another document. Another scroll. Another few lines in the eternal script of Byzantine administration. Outside, the city moves. But in here, time thickens, stretches, folds. 1,000 years from now, someone might discover your copied scroll in a clay jar or a monastery basement. They might marvel at your penmanship or laugh at your spelling. But tonight, you are one with the ink. You finish the page. The master nods. This time, he does not smear it. Instead, he seals it with a warm blob of wax and presses the office ring into it. You watch the crest imprint slowly, thinking, this mark could move troops, raise taxes, bless a bishop or send someone to a goat pen in Armenia. The power of paperwork. You sigh, stretch again, and walk out into the night. Your fingertips are stained, your back is sore, and your head is filled with the scent of parchment and the slow, heavy silence of bureaucracy. But you've done it. You've become a drop in the vast Byzantine inkwell. And the empire thanks you. Probably. It's the end of another long day in the Imperial Record Office, and you're slumped against a low stone wall, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a slow, golden fade. You should feel relief your scrolls are completed, sealed, and handed off. But all you can think about is how the next day, the cycle starts again. And, more urgently, how your stomach is growling louder than a Byzantine siege engine. You rise, stretching your legs, and shuffle off towards the city's famed marketplace. The agora is in full swing, a chaotic hum of bartering voices and the smell of roasting lamb, fresh bread, and incense. It's crowded, but it's also a brief escape from the rigid walls of the Chartophylakion. And as you walk, you realize that there's something deeply comforting about this place: the lively energy, the rows of shops hawking everything from intricate jewelry to elaborate perfumes, the buzz of conversation between traders and scribes, the occasional whiff of fish guts and spices. Here, you can almost forget about the weight of paperwork. Almost. As you pass an old vendor, a familiar face catches your attention: an old colleague from your early days as a novice scribe. His name is Nikitas. He's perched beside a cart, scribbling away on a piece of parchment with a grin on his face that, frankly, could rival the emperor's. Ah, the great scribe returns. Nikitas calls, and waves you over. Come, come, sit. I've got something for you. You glance down at the parchment in his hands. It's a new prostigma, a decree, written hastily but neatly. The ink is fresh, and the words are far more entertaining than anything you've copied today. He's penned a snarky letter to the head of a rival trade guild, challenging him to a public debate about the quality of his wool. Nothing too serious, of course, just a little fun. It's a reminder that even in the most bureaucratic of spaces, humor and wit can still find their way in. Nikitas looks up at you, his eyebrows raised. So, tell me, how is the sacred world of imperial documents? Have you already inscribed your name into the annals of history? You chuckle softly. It feels more like I'm erasing it every day. He laughs. Ah, the joys of working for emperors. Just remember, all this paperwork, the decrees, the orders, the tax codes, it's all part of the grand mosaic. We're just the little bits of grout, keeping everything together. You nod, but in the back of your mind, you can't help but wonder. Maybe he's right. Maybe all this ink, all this parchment, is part of something bigger than just one man's day-to-day drudgery. Nikitas doesn't seem to be bothered by it, though. As he hands you the parchment, he winks. Keep this one between us. All right, I don't want to end up on the wrong side of a tax audit. You grin and tuck the scroll under your arm, making your way through the marketplace once more, feeling the warmth of the evening settle around you like a heavy blanket. As the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon, the world begins to transition from busy market hubbub to a quieter, more solemn pace. Vendors are packing up, the clink of metal and the shuffle of feet marking the end of another day in the empire. And yet, somehow, the moment feels like a brief reprieve. The kind of quiet you get before a new scroll arrives, before another decree is set into motion, before the next scribe enters the great game of Byzantine bureaucracy. Historians agree that the Byzantines had an almost obsessive need for regulation and control. They wrote laws, collected taxes, and implemented edicts with such meticulous detail that even the smallest decree had far-reaching consequences. But historians still argue whether this obsession was a sign of profound organizational genius or whether it was simply a symptom of imperial paranoia. You can't help but wonder, as you walk past the last of the food stalls, whether the grand strategy of it all was just to keep everyone too busy with their own scrolls to notice that the empire was beginning to fray at the edges. With that thought in mind, you make your way home, the parchment tucked safely under your arm. Your belly is still a little empty, but there's something almost comforting about the constant hum of Byzantine life. Tomorrow, there will be more scrolls, more ink, more orders to copy. It'll all be the same and it'll all be different. Tomorrow, you'll wake up to face it again. But for tonight, at least, there's the quiet of your home, the warm flicker of oil lamps, and the distant, comforting hum of the city, as Byzantine bureaucracy quietly churns on. The morning sun spills over your humble room, casting long shadows on the walls as you begin your ritualistic preparation for the day ahead. It's another one of those quiet mornings where you can almost pretend that the weight of bureaucracy doesn't exist, that for just a moment, you're free from the never-ending stream of scrolls, orders, and decrees. The scent of bread wafts from the neighbor's oven, the soft clinking of iron from the blacksmith's shop reaches your ears, and for a few minutes, you allow yourself to just be. But it's fleeting, isn't it? Your morning ritual is simple, a quick dip into the cold water of the basin, a glance at the small shrine to Saint Demetrius that stands in the corner of your room, a few quiet moments to center yourself. And then, inevitably, you pick up the first scroll of the day. Today's first task is a set of petitions. Dozens of small requests from citizens across the empire, farmers asking for land grants, traders requesting travel permits, families begging for tax exemptions. Every petition is a small slice of someone's life, a snippet of their hopes, their struggles, their dreams. You can almost hear the voices behind each petition as you read them, the desperate plea for a new home, the plea for mercy, the yearning for a small bit of favor from the emperor. As you copy the first petition, a feeling of unease lingers in the back of your mind. You can't quite put your finger on it. Maybe it's the petitions themselves, so many requests, so much need. Or maybe it's the thought that, despite all these scrolls and all these petitions, the emperor can't possibly fulfill them all. Not even close. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Empire's success lay in the sheer number of documents they produced or whether it was the complex system of bureaucracy that allowed them to function at all. Was it the emperor's will, or the will of the scribes, that kept the empire running? You continue writing. The rhythmic scratch of your quill against the parchment is almost soothing. The ink flows like a river, carving out each letter, each word with careful precision. It's a process you know all too well, but you can't help but wonder, if the emperor's power is built on these scrolls, then who truly holds the power, you, the scribe, or the man on the throne? The question lingers in your mind as you complete the petitions and prepare for the next task. It's another day in the Chartophylakion, where history is not written in grand battles or lavish celebrations, but in the careful strokes of a quill on a blank piece of parchment. A knock on the door interrupts your thoughts. You set your quill down, stretch your stiff fingers, and rise to answer it. When you open the door, you find a messenger standing there, holding a scroll. It's an official imperial order, one that you'll need to copy and send to the various regional officials. You glance at the seal. It's a serious one. The emperor himself has written it. The messenger's eyes are tired, his face drawn. You can tell that the journey here wasn't easy. He hands over the scroll, nods briefly, and leaves without saying a word. You unroll the scroll, reading the words carefully. It's a decree demanding stricter regulation of local markets. A new tax will be imposed on grain, and all merchants must register with the local authorities. It's a move that will undoubtedly upset many, but it's also necessary to maintain the emperor's control. Historians still debate whether the Byzantine Empire's intricate tax system was the key to their success, or if it was the source of their eventual decline. After all, an empire can only thrive if its people can bear the weight of its demands. And sometimes, those demands can break even the strongest empires. You roll the scroll back up, place it in your satchel, and prepare for your day's work. Another petition, another decree, another line of ink to be written. This is your life. The scribe's life. A life spent in the shadows of the emperor's power, yet still shaping the course of history, one scroll at a time. And so, you continue on, writing, copying, and waiting for the next command. The day stretches before you like an endless sea of parchment and ink, but somehow, you feel a strange sense of satisfaction. In a way, you are part of something much larger than yourself. You are part of an empire that will be remembered for centuries, even if your name will never be written in the history books. The day marches on, and the sun rises higher, the heat of midday creeping in through the narrow windows of your chamber. There's no turning back now. The work is endless, a perpetual cycle of copying, filing, and organizing. But the sound of your quill scratching against the parchment has become something of a comfort, its rhythm like a heartbeat, steady and reliable. As the scrolls pile up around you, you find yourself drifting into a kind of trance, the words flowing from your hand as if they are not your own. It's almost as though you are not a person, but a conduit, a messenger between the emperor's will and the people he governs. You think of the masses, their lives shaped by the very documents you handle so casually. It's strange, isn't it, how the fate of a kingdom can rest in something as small as a piece of parchment you pick up the next decree. It's a tax law. The empire's tax system has always been a complex one, and it's your task to make sure the details are copied precisely. But something about this decree catches your eye. The tax rates are being raised again, this time on all imports, and the penalties for evasion are harsher than ever. You can already hear the murmurs of discontent from the merchant class, who will surely feel the sting of these new regulations. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Empire's over-reliance on taxes and tariffs was a stabilizing force or a contributing factor to its eventual downfall. Some believe that the taxes were necessary to fund the empire's military and administrative needs, while others contend that they suffocated the common people, leading to unrest and rebellion. As you copy the law, your mind drifts to the emperor himself. What must it be like, to be the man who makes these decisions, to hold so much power, yet to be bound by the very system you've created? You imagine the emperor, sitting in his grand hall, surrounded by his advisors, all of them scrutinizing the empire's endless stream of paperwork. It's a strange image, one that almost feels disconnected from the reality you know. You finish the decree, roll it up, and send it off to the appropriate officials. There's a certain finality in the task, as if by sealing it, you've set the law into motion, irreversible now. And yet, for all the weight it carries, there's a part of you that wonders if it even matters. After all, you're not the one making history, you're just copying it. But history, like the ink on your quill, flows on, whether you like it or not. The clock ticks on, each minute slipping away, unnoticed. You move on to the next task, another petition, another decree, another day in the life of a Byzantine bureaucrat. There's no time to stop and think, no time to wonder if the work you're doing will ever be remembered. But as you write, you can't help but feel that, in some small way, you are helping to keep the wheels of the empire turning. And then, as if on cue, there's another knock at the door, a familiar sound, one that means another piece of the puzzle is about to fall into place. You open the door to find a fellow scribe, carrying a stack of new scrolls. He greets you with a quick nod and hands over the bundle. You glance through the scrolls, and your heart sinks. There are more petitions, requests from the provinces for aid, for land, for money. The same stories, repeated again and again. You begin to copy them, the words blurring together as you work. The petitions are urgent, desperate, yet you can't help but wonder if they will ever be answered. There's simply not enough time, not enough resources, to address them all. The constant flow of requests and decrees begins to weigh on you. How many more scrolls will there be before the day ends? How many more people will you help, or, more accurately, how many will you fail to help, because there's simply isn't enough time to get to every request? The thought nags at you, but you push it aside. This is your duty, after all. The empire runs on this bureaucracy, on these documents. It's the way things have always been and likely, the way they always will be. You can't change that. All you can do is your part, small as it may be. You continue writing, your quill moving faster now, as though trying to outrun your own thoughts. The petitions blur together, one after another, each one a small cry for help in a vast, impersonal empire. And yet, in the back of your mind, you can't help but wonder, what happens to these petitions? Do they ever reach the emperor, or do they simply get lost in the endless sea of paperwork, never to be answered? Historians still argue whether the Byzantine bureaucracy was an effective means of governance or a bloated, inefficient system that eventually doomed the empire. Some claim it was the key to the empire's long-lasting stability, while others suggest that the sheer volume of paperwork made it impossible for any meaningful decisions to be made. As you continue your work, you can't help but feel the weight of history bearing down on you. You are part of something much larger than yourself, an empire that spans centuries, that reaches across continents. And yet, in the end, you're just a small cog in the machine, writing, copying, and filing. But even cogs, it seems, play their part in the grand design. The day shifts again, and your mind, heavy with the weight of endless scrolls and decrees, begins to wander. You've copied enough tax laws, enough petitions, enough requests from the provinces to last a lifetime. The soft scrape of the quill against the parchment has begun to blur into background noise, almost as if it's become a part of you. Your muscles ache from hours of relentless writing, yet there's no end in sight. This is your life, after all. The small, repetitive motions that make up the great, sweeping machinery of the empire. You are both a part of it and an observer of it, watching as it unfolds from your humble desk. But the work today is different. Today, as you work through yet another pile of scrolls, something catches your attention. Among the usual requests and petitions, there's one that stands out, a letter sealed with the imperial crest. The seal is unbroken, and your heart skips a beat. This could be important, this could be something that will change everything. But you have to resist the temptation to tear it open right away. No, you must maintain decorum. After all, you are a Byzantine bureaucrat, trained to handle such matters with the utmost seriousness. Historians still debate the true power of the Byzantine seal. Was it simply a symbol of the emperor's authority, or did it carry with it some kind of mystical power? Some say that the seal, when properly used, could transform a mundane piece of paper into a document that shaped the future of the empire itself. Others argue it was merely a piece of wax, no more magical than the ink in your quill. You glance at the seal once more, your fingers itching to break it. But you wait, setting the scroll aside for the moment. This will have to wait until your duties are done. You turn your attention back to the pile before you, but your mind is already drifting back to the seal. What is it about this letter that has you so captivated? You've handled thousands of scrolls in your life, yet none of them have had this effect on you. The pile of work seems to loom larger as you try to push the thought of the sealed letter from your mind. But it's no use, the letter calls to you. You try to focus, to keep your mind on the task at hand, but every so often, your eyes wander back to the scroll. The seal seems to gleam in the dim light of your chamber, a quiet promise of something more. The emperor's will, sealed with wax, ready to be read. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine bureaucracy's obsession with formality, with seals and stamps, was a sign of the empire's sophistication or a symptom of its increasingly rigid and ineffective governance. Some believe that the meticulous attention to detail reflected the empire's desire for order and control, while others argue that it was a sign of an empire suffocating under its own weight. You finally finish the task before you and can no longer resist. You carefully break the seal, unrolling the letter with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred texts. The writing is precise, formal, and direct, just as you would expect. But there's something different about this letter. It's a decree from the emperor himself, a direct order to initiate a new project, one that will require the full cooperation of the imperial bureaucracy. It's a monumental task, and one that will change the way things are done in the empire. Your heart races as you read through the details. You'll be at the heart of it all, you realize. The fate of the empire will pass through your hands, and the weight of it all settles heavily on your shoulders. The emperor's decree calls for the construction of a new public works project, an aqueduct to bring fresh water to the capital, a feat of engineering that will require the labor of thousands and the coordination of countless departments within the empire's vast bureaucracy. You feel a mix of awe and trepidation as you absorb the details. The project will span years, possibly decades, and it will require an army of scribes, engineers, and laborers to see it through. Historians still argue whether projects like this, grand in scale and ambition, were the crowning achievements of Byzantine engineering or simply another example of the empire's hubris. Some say the Byzantine engineers were visionary, crafting marvels that still stand today. Others argue that such projects drained the empire's resources, leading to its eventual downfall. You fold the letter carefully, knowing that this will change everything. The paperwork, the petitions, the daily grind, suddenly, it all feels insignificant. You have been given a new purpose, a new task that will define your place in history. You will be a part of something far bigger than yourself, a cog in the machine that will build something lasting, something that will be remembered for centuries to come. But for now, you are just a scribe, sitting in your small chamber, surrounded by scrolls. You take a deep breath and turn your attention back to the pile before you. The weight of the emperor's decree still presses on you, but you push it aside for the moment. There is work to be done. The empire waits for no one. The weight of your duties hangs heavily, and as the days pass, the scope of the emperor's decree starts to settle into your routine. The paperwork begins to mount. There are requests for materials, petitions for manpower, and a constant stream of communications from engineers, planners, and laborers. You thought you understood the Byzantine bureaucracy before, but now you see just how deep the web runs. Every request is a thread, every piece of parchment a small part of a vast, intricate tapestry that stretches across the entire empire. As you sit at your desk, quill in hand, copying another letter, you can't help but feel the enormity of it all. You are no longer just a scribe, copying down the orders of others. No, now you are at the center of it all, orchestrating the flow of information that will make the emperor's vision a reality. But with this newfound power comes a new kind of exhaustion. The weight of the bureaucracy is crushing. The paperwork never stops, the forms never cease. You begin to wonder if the empire is more paper than flesh, more bureaucracy than civilization. But even in this overwhelming task, there's a certain beauty. The meticulous order of it all, the careful attention to detail, the slow and steady progress of the empire. It's almost like watching a massive machine in motion, its gears turning one by one. And you are part of that machine, a small but vital cog, helping it run smoothly. There's something satisfying about it, even if it is mind-numbingly repetitive. You find a strange rhythm in the process, a kind of meditative flow that makes the hours slip by unnoticed. Historians still debate the role of bureaucrats in the success of the Byzantine Empire. Were they the unsung heroes, quietly ensuring that the empire functioned, or were they a symptom of an overcomplicated system that ultimately led to the empire's downfall? Some scholars argue that the Byzantine bureaucrats were the backbone of the empire, keeping everything running with their meticulous record-keeping and attention to detail. Others suggest that the over-reliance on bureaucracy made the empire slow to adapt, bogged down by its own rules and regulations. One day, as you're going through yet another pile of paperwork, a letter arrives that changes everything again. This one is from the head of the engineering team overseeing the aqueduct project. The letter is simple, almost terse, and it's addressed directly to you. The engineer requests an audience to discuss the logistics of the project, specifically, the number of laborers needed to begin construction. The weight of the request doesn't hit you immediately, but when you finally digest it, you realize that the project has reached a critical juncture. Construction is about to begin in earnest, and this means a flood of new tasks will be placed on your desk. You take a deep breath, knowing what's coming. You've always handled the paperwork of the empire with steady hands, but this will be something different. As the project takes shape, you know the volume of work will increase exponentially. You'll be in charge of coordinating everything, ensuring that the flow of materials, the workforce, and the funds is managed flawlessly. The smallest mistake could throw the entire project into disarray. The pressure is mounting, but there's no room for error. The empire is watching, and the emperor's vision must come to life. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine bureaucracy's obsession with order was its greatest strength or its eventual downfall. Some believe that it was the rigid structure that allowed the empire to endure for so long, while others argue that it was the very reason for its collapse. The debate rages on, but for you, in this moment, the question is irrelevant. All that matters is getting the work done. As the days pass, the project begins to take shape, and so does the mounting pile of paperwork. You work long hours, poring over reports, coordinating with officials, and ensuring that everything is moving forward as it should. The workload has never been heavier, but you push through it. You've become a machine in your own right, churning out forms, overseeing logistics, and ensuring that the grand vision of the emperor is realized. But as you work, you begin to wonder, what would it be like to step away from all of this, to leave behind the endless scrolls and the relentless paperwork? It's a fleeting thought, one that passes quickly, but it lingers in the back of your mind. For a moment, you imagine a life outside the bureaucracy, a life where you are not bound by the chains of the empire's endless paperwork. But then, reality sets in. You are a part of this system. You can't escape it. It's who you are. The sun begins to set as you sit at your desk, the last rays of light filtering through the window. The flicker of a candle casts long shadows across the parchment before you, and the weight of the day presses down on your shoulders. But you've survived another day, another round of paperwork. You'll do it all again tomorrow, and the day after that. This is your life now. The empire's demands are endless, but you are here, serving them, one scroll at a time. The work continues, each day a mirror of the last. It becomes a blur of ink-stained fingers, quills scratching on parchment, and the constant rustle of scrolls. You lose track of time. The hours blend into one another, punctuated only by the flickering of oil lamps, the occasional creak of the wooden chair beneath you, and the quiet murmur of conversations from other parts of the bureaucracy. There's a rhythm to the work, an endless loop that you've become accustomed to, but somehow, the monotony doesn't feel like a prison. You've settled into the steady cadence of it all. As weeks pass, the scope of the Emperor's projects grows. There are new requests, new schemes, and new orders to execute. The flow of paperwork seems endless, a river that never runs dry. Yet, amidst all this activity, there's an undercurrent of satisfaction. The grand construction project's new aqueducts, bridges, fortifications are slowly taking form. You can see it in the daily reports, in the plans and the updates. The empire is changing, evolving, expanding, and you are at the heart of it all. You find yourself increasingly aware of the enormity of what you're part of. When you close your eyes, you can almost feel the weight of history pressing down on your shoulders. You're not just working to fulfill an emperor's dream, you're contributing to the legacy of an empire that has lasted for centuries. This realization brings a strange kind of peace. Yes, the work is grueling, and yes, the hours are long, but there is a sense of purpose here. You are a part of something much larger than yourself, something that will outlast you. Historians have long debated the long-term impact of Byzantine bureaucracy on the empire's stability. Some argue that it was this very system of meticulous record-keeping, of constant oversight and regulation, that allowed the empire to thrive for as long as it did. The Byzantines were masters of administration, and their bureaucratic structures were unrivaled in the ancient world. Others, however, suggest that the sheer size and complexity of the system ultimately contributed to the empire's decline. As the bureaucracy grew, so too did its inefficiencies. It became a tangled web of procedures and rules, difficult to navigate and even harder to reform. But none of this is on your mind as you sit at your desk. You are too consumed with the task at hand. The paperwork is relentless, but there is no other choice but to keep moving forward. As you fill out another form, the significance of your work continues to settle in. You are not merely a cog in the machine, you are a key part of the empire's engine, ensuring that its gears continue to turn smoothly. It's late now, and the day's work is winding down. The candlelight flickers weakly, casting long shadows across the stone walls. You take a moment to stretch your stiff limbs, feeling the weight of your exhaustion. You've made it through another day, another mountain of paperwork. It's a small victory, but it's yours. And in the grand scheme of things, it is enough. Tomorrow will come, with new requests, new forms, and new challenges. But for now, you can rest, knowing that you've done your part. The empire will keep moving, and you will be here, ready to guide it forward. As you close your eyes, you feel a sense of finality, as if the work of a lifetime has come to a close. But you know better. There is no end to this cycle. Tomorrow, you will wake up to another day of scrolls and ink, another round of paper and bureaucracy. And you'll do it all again, because that is the role you've been given, the role you've come to accept. The empire may change, the emperor may come and go, but the paperwork, the bureaucracy, it will remain. And as you drift off to sleep, you realize that, in some strange way, this endless cycle is what has kept the empire alive. It is the lifeblood of the Byzantine world, flowing through every corner of the empire, ensuring its continued existence. The work may be dull, but it is essential. Without it, the empire would crumble, and so you keep going, one scroll at a time, one form after another. And with that thought, you surrender to the quiet peace of the night, knowing that the work will wait for you tomorrow. It always does.